morning. What, why is this world so full of pain and suffering, death, destruction, difficulty? This is a question that would be a foundational question for a lot of people. And what's interesting to me is if you were to ask this question to nearly any Christian around the world today, and you said, what's the technical reason or the technical answer to this question? Typically, you're going to get pretty much the same answer across the board. They're going to talk to you, we will talk to you about the fall in the Garden of Eden, about Adam and Eve's sin and the entrance of sin and death into this world. And that is absolutely a correct answer. But what also is interesting to me is if we were to ask the same question of a Christian in the very early church, or for instance, a first century Jew. Now, if we ask them, how did sin or death enter the world? They would answer exactly as we did. But if you ask the question that I started with, which is, why is there so much sin? Why is the world the way that it is? You'd actually get a slightly different answer. They would talk to you about the three rebellions of man. Now, before you think I'm going to introduce some weird new doctrine and you're going to go have to tell the elders on me, these are all things we're very familiar with and we have already covered in this series. All I would like to do to start out here this morning is to sort of group these things together in a slightly different way. You see, we're in a culture where we tend to take these stories of the Bible and put them in their own little cells or groupings or context. And we talk about them, but as we talk about them, we kind of keep them to themselves. And we may kind of put these stories in order and understand there's a basic progression. But what we tend to lose is that the Bible, despite being 66 books written across 1,400 years on 3 continents by over 40 men in 3 different languages, is one continuous story and arc. And so we're in this series called Foundations, and that is part of what we're trying to do. We're spending 10 weeks in the book of Genesis. We could spend 2 years in the book of Genesis and continue to dig down into it. But we're not just going microscopic, we're also going macroscopic. We want to see how the stories, the foundations that are in Genesis, develop and interact with each other. And so to that end, it's important, I think, to remember that this series is called Foundations, not just Foundation. That there are multiple major foundations to who we are, our faith, the world we live in, the important questions in life that are found right here in Genesis. Now, you could group these differently if you were, depending on who you are, but for our purposes, I want to kind of look at 4 different foundations that we have been covering and will cover in this series in the book of Genesis. And so the first foundation, and by the way, for my nerds out there, yes, I hear the Isaac Asimov. It's not a reference, it's just an acknowledgement. Anyway, the first foundation is our creation. That's why we spent the first couple of weeks on this. And when we talked about our creation, the foundational thing that was talking about is what we were made for. This is an important thing that we need to know and understand and be revealed to how we live life and what the purpose is. What were we originally designed for? How are we supposed to operate? What is the thing we're shooting for? What was God's intention for the world and what was his plan A? But then we move on to the second foundational element, which is based on the question I just asked. Why is the world the way it is? And we go from our creation to our need because we mess up plan A. And that's where we enter into the first of the 3 rebellions that I talked about, which is the fall in the garden, just what most people would reference. And it's at this point that sin and death enter the world, that the door is opened. That's absolutely true. And there's a consequence for that, and we are put out of the garden, and the curse comes into play. But God goes, I'm not giving up. Yes, we've had a problem, and plan A is not on the table right now, but I'm going to introduce plan B. And the cool thing about plan B, or any one of God's plans, is that it always has an ultimate point to get back to plan A, back to that first foundation that we learned about, and have that goal. And he says, okay, well, here's your instructions for plan B. I want you to go out, spread out, multiply, be fruitful, and obey my commands. And of course, we mess up plan B right away again, just as we messed up plan A. And we do that in Genesis 6, which culminates in the flood. And it's interesting because as sin and death entered in the fall of the garden, so within Genesis 6, now is there not only a corruption of our physical realm in which we live, but also of the interaction and corruption from the spiritual realm and the proliferation of sin. As sin enters in the first rebellion, it grows, proliferates, saturates in the second rebellion out of all proportion. And again, God goes, there must be a consequence. And this world has become so corrupted that he basically wipes it out. But again, with another plan, we move from plan B to plan C. And he takes Noah and he takes his family and he has this seed and he says it's through them. Now the people that come after will know the importance of following my commands, for I destroyed the entire world. This is so important. And the instructions after this are very much like they were the first time. Go out, spread out, multiply, and obey my commandments. But we don't listen to that either. And it results in the Tower of Babel. Now, what we do to the Tower of Babel, in my opinion, is borderline criminal. We treat it like some sort of mythological children's story, like there's a bunch of people that were building a tower so they could walk into heaven to join God. And that is not what that story is about. That's not what's actually being said there. First off, every biblical scholar I've ever heard talk about this all agrees on one thing. The tower they were building was something called a ziggurat. Now, a ziggurat was a temple tower with a specific purpose. The idea of a ziggurat is that it could capture, control, or dominate a divine figure. And the reason they're building a tower unto heaven is the attempt is to build a tower so large, the bigger the tower, the more powerful it could be, that they might capture or control the God of the universe himself. Now, this plan is silly. It will never work. But God is looking at this and going, I told you to spread out and to obey, and instead you congregated together, and you don't just disobey, but you seek to dominate me and take my throne. This isn't happening. So he confuses language. He forces the spreading out. And that is where we see the result. We go from sin entering to growing to dominating. And so this foundation teaches us of the need that we have for a Savior, which takes us to the third element that we have been in recently, which is our salvation. And instead of based on three events, this is mapped across three people, three lives. And what God's going to do here is he's going to say, at this point, I'm done. You guys have struck out 3 times. I've promised not to destroy everybody again, but I am disinheriting the nations. Deuteronomy 32. Up until this point, God's people are all people. But he's going, now I'm going to restart with a remnant, as I did with Noah, but this time it will be in the midst of those who have been disinherited. There will be this seed, and through this seed will be the way I get us back to plan A. Through this seed is where I will send my son. This is where Jesus will show up, and it's going to be through these people, the people of Israel. So we see the development of the people of Israel, and that foundation is a roadmap to our salvation. Not only is it the method by which our salvation will come in Jesus, it's also going to be an example to us of how it's developed, will show how we as people enter into a saving relationship with Jesus. And he starts with Abraham. He starts with Abram. He picks Abram. He goes, this is my guy. And he makes promises to Abram. And he has a purpose for Abram. And through that, we see that the salvation starts by God's promise and God's purpose. But Abram is not renamed Israel. He hasn't entered in. It's not a complete saving people yet. He is not Israel. He may be the father or grandfather of Israel, but he isn't Israel itself yet. And so he is not renamed Israel, but Abraham. And then we see Isaac, who we've been talking about recently. You see, God knows not only should it be by his promise, but it also has to be by his power. We can't do anything to save ourselves. And so when he picks Abram, he goes, this guy is perfect because he can't have kids. And that might sound weird, but he goes, my people are going to know that they depended on my power for their very existence. Their father, Isaac, wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for my miraculous power. Now again, not all of Abraham's children, because he tries to help God out in a not good way and father other children as an assist, they are not part of Israel. Isaac's name is also chosen by God, and God does not choose the name yet Israel either. So we see it's by God's promise, but that's not enough. Weird to say, but it's true. And it must be by God's power. Still not enough. Not every one of Isaac's children, as we'll see today, become Israel. It's not until we reach Jacob. Today we're going to see how it's not only needing to be by God's power and his promise, but also by his plan. And we'll see how God's plan is required for a saving relationship and salvation. Now, before we jump into Jacob, I want to say there is that fourth element, because I promised 4 foundations for those who remember, and that is we go from our salvation to now that we've entered into that relationship to our mission. And this will be from the children of Israel, or Jacob, and we'll be talking about that next week. And actually, our series right after this is going to be all about mission as well. So we will come back to that. But as we look at what's going on with Isaac, where we left off last week, we find him, he's found a wife, Rebecca, and we're going to jump into our scripture here for the morning as we go through Genesis 25-23. What this is God speaking to Rebecca, Isaac's wife, about her impending pregnancy. And it says, "And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Now, a couple of things here. God is revealing to Rebecca his plan. And it doesn't look like our plan. It doesn't look like the human plan. In that culture, of course, the eldest was the one who would inherit. He was the one you would expect to receive it. And that is not what God puts forward. But we also see here that, again, Isaac isn't Israel yet, because not every one of his children is going to be the people of Israel. There are multiple nations that will come from Isaac. And so if we jump down a couple of verses and we get into 24-26, it says, "When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins." Okay, 2 children in her womb. That makes sense. "The first came out red, and his body was hairy, his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Hairy." And you're like, no, that says Esau. It doesn't say hairy. Well, guess what? Esau is simply Hebrew word for hairy. You'll find Isaac and Rebecca are not exactly geniuses when it comes to names. A kid pops out, he's all hairy. They go, his name will be Harry. It's really that simple. And then afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Harry's or Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Guess what Jacob means in Hebrew? Heel grabber, heel grasper. Again, it wasn't super original, but here's the thing about the name Jacob. The comment or the words for heel grabber, heel grasper, they kind of had another meaning. They could mean a supplanter, a sneaky one who was trying to take something beyond their position. It also meant liar or deceiver. Now, we may have some Jacobs here today, and I'm sorry. I know the name's not sounding great right now. Names can be kind of weird. Douglas comes from some weird Celtic battle cry meaning dark blue, black hill, blood river. So even my name's odd, but in this case, the name does mean something in the story, but if you're a Jacob, I want you to hold on because it's going to get better, I promise. Okay? So what's interesting here is that as we progress in this story, we know Rebecca knows that it is Jacob who is the one who has been given this promise, and she loves Jacob. She favors Jacob. It's obvious in the family. Meanwhile, Isaac really likes Esau and favors Esau. It's not a great family dynamic. It doesn't set them up for success right off the bat. And yet, I think, for those who are familiar with this story, in the battle between Jacob and Esau, I think there's a weird American thing we have to deal with here, because we're so used to rooting for the underdog in everything that we find Jacob at first glance to be more likable than Esau. After all, just because he's firstborn, just because he's bigger and tougher, he grows up into sort of the jock type and the great hunter. And we like to root for the little guy. But if we really read this story, Jacob is not a likable little guy. Jacob is not a good dude. He's really a terrible person for most of his life. And Esau is actually far more likable. And we can miss that as we look at the story. Jacob is a schemer. His name is liar. It's deceiver. And he really does do that. And he's malicious and takes things from other people. Esau makes mistakes, but he doesn't do that kind of thing. Esau is the kind of person you'd expect to be a leader, to be likable in the culture, and Jacob isn't. And as they grow up, Esau becomes this great hunter, and one day he comes back from hunting and he's just starving. He needs to eat really, really bad, and he sees Jacob making this lentil stew, and he's like, "Buddy, give me some stew." And Jacob goes, "All right, fine. Give me your birthright." Right? Classic little brother overreach. I finally have a moment of power. I'm going to take everything I can get. And it's really stupid for Esau to go ahead and give up his birthright. But he does it. And this isn't as crazy as we think it is. First off, Esau is young and dumb, and we do dumb things. The other thing is he's hungry. He's tired. Have you guys ever gone to the grocery store and tried to buy groceries while you're really hungry? You end up opening the cupboard 5 days later and going, "Why are there 8 boxes of Fig Newtons? Like, who thought this was a good idea?" Right? But we do weird stuff when we're really hungry. And Esau immediately regrets doing this, but he gives Jacob his birthright. Now, the other thing is Jacob may know that he's been told that God has a plan for him to be the greater or the blessing, but he feels like it's his job to take it, to manipulate it, not to trust God with it. And frankly, his mother does the same thing, because as Isaac gets old and his eyesight is failing, he calls Esau in one day and he's like, "Esau, I love when you hunt. I love your great food. Can you go out and hunt and kill and prepare some really good food for me? Because you know what? I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here, and I think it's high time that I give you my blessing." And Esau goes, "Great, win-win," and he takes off. But Rebekah's at the door, so she goes to Esau. And when she gets to Esau, or not to Esau, she gets to Jacob, she goes, "Jacob, here's what we're going to do. We're going to kill a goat. We're going to prep the goat, and you're going to go in and pretend to be your brother so that you receiving the blessing from your father instead of your brother." And even Jacob goes, "There's no way he's going to believe I'm Esau." She goes, "No, no, 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 no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put your brother's clothes on so you smell like him. We're going to put that goat's fur on your arms and hands so you feel like him." Talk about a hairy dude, by the way. Goat hair is what you need to have arms that feel like this guy. Okay? But he does it, and he brings it in, and of course, Isaac goes, "You sound like Jacob, not like Esau." And he goes, "No, I'm Esau." And so he comes near, and and Isaac can smell him, and he smells like Esau, and feels him, and he feels like Esau. And he goes, "Okay," and he eats the food, and he gives Jacob the blessing. And then Jacob leaves, and Esau comes in and goes, "Hey, Dad, I'm here with your food and for my blessing." And he goes, "Who are you?" And he goes, "Esau." And he goes, "Then who did I just bless?" And of course, Esau is furious at this turn of events. And that's where we'll pick back up here in chapter 27, verse 36. Esau says, "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" Right? Deceiver, supplanter, liar, heel grabber. "For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." Now, how mad is Esau going to be? Well, if we jump down just a couple verses, it'll tell us. Now, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother, Jacob." So he's going, "This isn't right. This is wrong. This was stolen from me. This absolutely isn't fair. The only way that I can get my birthright back, my blessing back, because that's been given to my brother and that can't just be undone, is to kill him. Then I could take it. But I'm not going to do it while my father's alive. I'm not going to cause him that pain, but he's not long for this world. So when he dies, I will kill my brother." Not a nice thing, but relatively understandable given the cheating and stealing and terrible things that his brother has done to him. Well, the thing is that Jacob and his mother find out about this. And instead of facing it, instead of dealing with their sin, instead of facing the things that they've done, they plot to have Jacob flee. He goes to his father and talks about finding a wife back in the land of their homeland with a woman from their part of the world instead of those who have a different culture in the area in which they are, which in and of itself isn't terrible, but at the end, he's fleeing from his brother and from the things he has done. And so as he travels, he stops in a place that will be called Bethel, and he lays his head down and he goes to sleep. And that passage that we read right before the bumper video came in about Jacob's ladder. That is the dream he has. He sees this ladder up to heaven with angels ascending and descending, and God makes him several promises. He says, I will give you and your descendants all the land around where you are. Not only that, and this is the cool part, he says, I will stay with you until these promises are fulfilled. Right? And that's really interesting to me, that they're in this situation. And I want to point something out, because we're going to look at how Jacob responds to this. But I want to remind us, Jacob is finalizing a roadmap of understanding how we enter into a saving relationship with God, that it must be through his promise, that his salvation only comes through his power, and that it has to be by his plan. We'll see that in this, Jacob responds somewhat positively, accepts the overarching concept of God's plan. But his name does not become Israel. He's still Jacob. You see, we can look intellectually at the Bible and at the world, and we can understand that we were made for something specific and different. We can understand that the world is broken and that we have a need and that we need help. We can understand even and accept that perhaps that needs to be through the promises God made, or that only he has the power to accomplish it, or even that it must be done according to his plan. And still, it's just an intellectual understanding. It isn't a saving relationship. Jesus comes to offer relationship, not just an intellectual exercise. And so there's something needed beyond just that intellectual understanding, and it starts with an encounter with God. Now, it's not always, and usually not, as dramatic as the dream, in which case Jacob just had. But we need some degree of relationship and encounter. And here Jacob has a powerful encounter with God that shows his power, that reveals his promises, that talks about his plan. And yet, Jacob's name doesn't change. Why? Well, the reason for it is in his response. It says, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a tenth to you. Okay, he's not out and out rejecting God, but what is he trying to do? Well, he's going, okay, yeah, no, God, it's got to be by your overarching plan. I'm good with that. But then I'm going to immediately undermine that by trying to take control back. Maybe your plan, but I'm going to be in control. If you go where I go, not I'll go where you want me. You go where I go. If you feed and clothe me, go to my father's house in peace. Guess what? I'm fleeing because of my sin. If you put me back with no consequences to the sin that I had and just make it all better for me, then I'll make you God. Then I'll worship you. Then I'll give you my tenth. He's dictating the terms of the relationship to God. He is not entering into relationship with him. That's not Israel. That's not a moment of saving faith. And so what ends up happening is from here, he goes on to this place, and he finds this beautiful girl, and he goes to the girl's father, and he goes, what do I have to do to marry your daughter? And he goes, work for me for 7 years. So Jacob works for him for 7 years, and then the wedding happens, and he's all excited, and he wakes up the next morning, and the veil comes up, and it's not the beautiful girl, it's her dumpy older sister. And he goes back to the father-in-law who just cheated him, much the way that he often cheated his brothers and others. And, well, why are you doing this? What do I have to do to get the daughter you promised me? And he goes, work another 7 years. So he works another 7 years and gets the other daughter, and now has both of them as wives. And he ends up taking one of each of their maids as an additional wife. And so he's got 4 wives, and he's got a bunch of kids. And he's still a mess. And he's asking his father-in-law, where are my wages? Where are what I get? And he works for him for another 6 years after those first 14. And God is blessing him the entire time. And here's Jacob watching God bless him and keep his promise that he had made to Jacob in spite of Jacob's mistakes and in spite of the fact that these things that Jacob thought he had to do to fulfill this promise or get what was promised him, he watched others do to remove it, and that had no effect on God. He could still work through it in spite of the lying and cheating. And I think that, if anything, starts to come home to Jacob. And finally, he decides to be obedient. Just simply submit to what God asked him to do. Not with the extra caveats, not with the extra requirements. And so he goes back home knowing full well that he thinks his brother will kill him. And he gets to a place on the road. He has sent gifts forward. He sends his wives and children back behind him so that he is a shield to them and not the other way around. He knows his brother is coming with an army. And that's where we pick up in really the pivotal point for me in the story of Jacob. And it says, and Jacob was left alone, right? So he sent everybody away. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Wait a minute, but he's alone, but a man is wrestling with him. So already we know something weird is going on here, because if you're alone, there's not another person there. But here there's both of those things happening. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched Jacob's or his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Wait, what? After all this, after talking about this whole journey, all these needs, multiple generations, all the stuff that goes into it, to reach a point of salvation and to reach an understanding with God and a roadmap to how we connect with Jesus and do those things, this is the moment, wrestling with this mysterious person, having your hip thrown out of joint and then just holding and saying, I'm not letting you go till you bless me. That's the point at which Israel comes to be. That's the marker of the start of the people that will bring Jesus, the roadmap that he's giving to point forward to how we enter into a relationship with Jesus. Well, let's see how it finishes here. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? Okay, that's an indicator, again, that something's going on that's seen in other places. And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, which means God's face. For I have seen the face of God, or I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. So the first thing we need to understand is, and again, this is something that nearly every biblical scholar will agree with, the man in this story that he's wrestling with is Jesus. It's what we call a Christophany or a theophany. So Jesus is coming down. Now, Jesus could destroy Jacob anytime he wanted from the first moment they started wrestling, but he wrestles with him as a man all the way until dawn, and he's going, Jacob is still fighting. He needs to know who he's dealing with. Touches him on the hip. Whoa, this is a person of power. But yet, even in the midst of that and the fear, remember, Jacob is trying to go forward to fulfill what God's asked him to do, to face what he has dealt with. And he is wrestling with this man. The implication is he's wrestling to be able to fulfill what he now realizes he must do. And he's gone from running away, making excuses, to literally fighting to face the difficult things he needs to face. And here, though, is what's interesting, because we just talked about when he was at Bethel with Jacob's ladder, he tried to dictate to God and say, well, I'll do this if you do this. And here again, he's being told, let me go. And he goes, no, I'm not letting you go till you bless me. Why is that so different? Isn't he demanding something in both cases? And the answer is, it's as different as it could possibly be. Because here at Peniel, he's not saying, you need to do this, and if I do this, you'll do that, and if you do that, I'll do this. He's not setting the terms of a blessing. He is holding on to God and going, I'm not letting go until you bless me. He's not telling God how to bless him, what the terms need to be, what's going to happen next. He said, I just am fighting for you. That's simple. It's a surrender, but it's not a passive surrender. This is what's interesting. Jacob's whole life is showing us that salvation comes by God's plan, not ours. And yet Jacob's whole life is one of a guy who continually is struggling and fighting, and he literally fights with God. Guess what Israel means? It means God fights. Not only did he fight with God, but God will fight for him, and God will fight for the people of Israel as God will fight for his people. That's the name God gives. Even though it's his plan, it doesn't mean we're not engaged. It doesn't mean that we're not fighting. It's just that we're not fighting to control God. We're fighting to surrender and to gain more of him. That's what's interesting. And here's, to me, the thing I want us to really take away from this morning and from what we are dealing with in this situation. There are people out there, and there might be people here this morning, who you've been through, you go, yeah, I was made for a purpose. Yeah, I understand it's broken. I understand I can't do it. It's by God's promise and power and plan. And maybe I've even encountered God. But you are in a place where you've encountered God the way Jacob encountered God at Bethel. You've come into Bethel, meaning God's house. You've come into God's house. You've come into a church. But you're dictating to God, I'll accept your plan, but this is how it's going to work. I'm going to define the terms. I'm going to do it this way. And there isn't a true surrender. I want us to understand. There's scary verses in the New Testament. Matthew 7. There will be those in that day, the day of judgment, that say, Lord, Lord, have I not cast out demons in your name and done great works in your name? And I will say, depart from me, for I never knew you. That's a scary verse. I'm not pulling any punches on it, but it shouldn't give us an unreasoned anxiety. It should give a rational motivation to understand and take with full commitment other verses like my sheep know my voice. To work forward to this goal, to get ourselves from Bethel to Peniel, from God's house to God face to face, to a surrender that says it's not, okay, I agree an idea and up here, to I surrender. I'm not going to dictate terms. I'm not going to tell you how this works. Let me close with this. I had a friend in high school, golden boy, Christian guy, felt like he had the whole world figured out. And yet, he had a high school, when he was a senior in high school, he got a girlfriend, dated her for a couple years, and she ended up leaving him, and he was devastated. Understandable. But all of a sudden, I watched this guy just run away from God, curse God, make fun of God, say these horrible things, all kinds of stuff. And finally, I got him one night in a point of vulnerability and just asked him the question, why? He said, because I was always told that my Savior was a God of comfort and a God of counsel. And when I lost that girlfriend, he wasn't there for me. But you know what I knew right away? That's not true. And I even told him this. I said, yeah, that's not true. What's true is you're trying to define what that comfort looks like. To you, there were only one of two acceptable options. Either I get her back or the pain goes away. But that's not what God promised to do. When he promised to be a comforter and a counselor, he promised to give you something deeper and of greater purpose that can drown out the pain of the loss in this great mission and salvation and relationship with him. You're defining your relationship with God. You're not letting him define your relationship with you. So I want to encourage everybody here this morning, afterwards, when the prayer team comes up, whatever it is, whether you need prayer wherever you are, particularly if you are standing at Bethel and you know you need to go to Peniel, you know you need to make that extra step of surrender. Don't wait. Allow this to be the morning to do that. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for the stories you've left, the foundations you've given, the word you've handed us, the example you've shown us in Abraham, in Isaac, in Jacob as your people. Lord, we bless you for it. Lord, I pray this morning that we cling on to you, that we refuse to let go until we receive your blessing, not on our terms, but on your terms. Lord, may we experience you face to face and learn and grow and enter into your mission with vigor and strength and love. Thank you, Lord, for all you have done. In your name, amen.